Excellent. So, right, Gary White, thank you very much for joining us today on the podcast. And it's been one of these things that slowly started to develop. I think this one's going to be episode 4, if I remember rightly. So we've got a couple of other episodes already in there. And so far, I've been really pleased with what's been going on with it and the stuff we're getting back and so on. So I suppose one of the things I wanted to bring on to discuss with you today was predominantly, obviously, your background being in the sort of financial area and the accounting section and things like that. It'd be good to get into that element of businesses, because obviously we want to talk about startups and how they sort of manage their finances, how they think about taxing, how they think about extracting money from it, how they look at maximizing the valuation of their companies, all those kind of things. But I'd definitely like to start, because I think it's quite interesting, with your background in football.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I never made it as a pro, but played decent sort of standard for about 40 years in the end, from the age of about 8 to 48 or 50. We actually, I was going to pack in when I got to 40. I was playing veterans football, and then I ended up setting up my own veterans team with a friend, Trevor, Peveril Veterans, and that became a really good club. And we got to Essex finals and things like that. So just kept going, really. But I've always been a football nut, West Ham supporter. I was director of Colchester United for 2 seasons, 2008 to 2010, which coincided with them moving to the new stadium. And that was a great experience, going to all the non-league grounds and everything, league grounds rather, going around the country, League One and Championship before that. It was just brilliant. You meet some great people, football's a great level.
And then are you still involved with Haybridge Thrifts as well?
I'm not. No, I was chairman there for 7 years. Okay. Just under 7 years. Great experience. Really good community club. Just learned so much doing that, and really enjoyed it. We went through a big major ground stadium improvement while I was there. Didn't get promoted, unfortunately, but got to the playoffs, won the playoffs, but didn't get promoted because of an FA restructure that meant that only 5 out of 7 teams in playoffs were able to go up on a sort of average points per game basis, which was just so annoying. But there you go. But great. Again, made some great friends in the process, and now just really free to watch games that I fancy, really. And it's a funny feeling, really. I've been that involved for 7 years, and now just going as a spectator, it takes some getting used to again.
I can imagine it does. How did you move from sort of from playing into the sort of setting up of your own thing and all that? And where did that come from?
I guess probably the entrepreneurial spirit, really. I set my own business up in 1990, and I suppose setting up a football team is a bit like it. And it's a similar sort of thing. It's like, people are enjoying it, and it just literally like guys just doing five-a-side on a Wednesday night at a local school. It started off with, and it originated from the pub where a few lads said they wanted to get fit. And some of these lads are like 21, and I was 40 at the time, and and it was great running around with youngsters. But then we soon became veterans because a lot of over 35s got involved, and it just went on from there, really. But so many good friendships created over that time. Of course, we had to have our tours away for various places. So I ended up in Dublin, Portugal, Marbella. We'll go there to play a game and have one or two beers while we're there.
That's great. I mean, I must admit, my footballing career, although it continues in a fairly small scale sort of 6-a-side thing that I play on Monday nights. That's about it. So I played for Felsted for quite a long time. Obviously, my local team, played for them for a number of years, and we never got to do anything particularly glamorous like go to Marbella or anything like that. So I think the furthest afield we ever got was Bradwell. I think that's as far.
The Marbella has got a funny story with that, because we turned up to play our game in this lovely little village called Ben Havia, and there's a nice little stadium there, and there's a game going on before we were due to go on, and one of the players playing there looked very familiar, and then he was looking at him, and he came over to take a throw, and it was Teddy Sheringham. He'd been over there on the golf weekend, and he was out drinking the night before and got chatting to a few blokes, and they said, "Can you play for us tomorrow?" And he was the best player on the pitch. He was probably 50. and he was still the best man on the pitch,
Well, you would expect that he would still be pretty good. I mean, he was someone who's still. I mean, I saw him on TV fairly recently. He still looks like he's in fairly good nick for his age. So I'm pretty sure he can still manage fairly well.
I do sort of know him, but I've got a friend who's his agent, and he's. I think having a wife who's like 15 to 20 years younger than you, I think helps. And
yes, sure that probably does. Is that life advice, Gary, or is that just?
Well, I don't know. I'm not speaking from personal experience. He is a Peter Pan type. He's
yeah.
very youthful still.
Yeah, it's. I think there's certain people who are like that, aren't there? There's certain people who are very much like that, who are sort of almost forever young in that sense.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously, you touched on the sort of entrepreneurial spirit side of things there. I think one of the things that I personally definitely like about you a lot is you're a very atypical accountant. Most people who are accountants are not particularly entrepreneurial. They're not. They're very sort of backroom numbers people generally. They're not generally the sort of people that are quite entrepreneurial, quite enterprising and looking at new things. So how do those two things in your mind sort of fit together for you? Because they sort of sit almost opposite ends on the sort of talent dynamics graphs and things like that, don't they? The sort of those things.
It's funny. I've been writing a book. I've been writing an autobiography the last few months, and a few things by doing that, a few things have come to my attention and explain certain actions and decisions I've taken over the years. And one of those that I realised I hadn't thought of was I had a job appraisal during the 80s, 1987, something like that. I used to work for Unigate. I was very much a corporate accountant. I qualified working for large companies as a sort of management accountant, really, rather than in practice. And I guess that makes me different from lots of other accountants who came through the traditional practice route of audit training and all this sort of stuff. So they're basically trained to find things that are wrong.
Yes.
Well, I never had that. I was trained to find things that were right. Which is very much well, they weren't always right, because it was in manufacturing. It was in the late 70s when I started off, and there was a lot of things that were wrong. But but that was a really good environment. It was a really tough environment. It was brutal at times. You'd come into work and then there would be like an empty desk, and where's John? And he'd got his P45 the day before. It was a tough environment there. Manufacturing was going through the doldrums and all but disappeared during that period when the more service-based economy came in. But no, I think going back to the job. The appraisal from my boss at the time, a guy called David Lattimore, he was a great guy. He was a really good leader. He'd been the group accountant himself, and he went into general management, then looked after a sort of 60 million turnover division, and then got me in as his accountant, which I was really chuffed about, because I moved within the company and moved up to the Eastern Counties region and was based in Luton. And what he said in that appraisal was that Gary likes to take the accounting to the people. And by that he meant that I really loved working with depot managers, going through their operating statement, which is a P&L basically, because every cost centre, profit centre, have their own revenue and their costs and everything. And I used to love going through that with people and helping them to maximise their profits, looking at areas of their operation, helping them to interpret their numbers better and trends and stuff like that. And this was in the early days of spreadsheets, really. So I got stuck into those, and it's something I really enjoyed doing. And I guess really those were the sort of small businesses at the time. Really, they were almost like businesses in their own right. One in particular, there was a depot at Dagenham, which was a tough area to run a milk depot, and yet that was our most profitable depot. And the guy who ran it was a guy called Ron Drake. He was a real character, terrific guy, God rest him. And he taught me a lot about leadership, and he was a brilliant leader. He had 50 or 60 people eating out of the palm of his hand, and his office his second office was the Admiral Vernon pub, which was just down the road from the depot. But I learned so much from dealing with people like that. They were like small businesses in their own right.
Yeah.
Some of them were quite entrepreneurial. They were very driven and determined. They got paid based on bonuses of the depot's profitability liability and that sort of stuff. And I loved managing downwards with those people going through their numbers. So I guess when the opportunity came to set my own business up, it was a bit of an extension of that.
Right.
So in 1990, I took the plunge and gave the company car back and got stuck into an accounting practice. And really, I had a ready-made supply of clients because Dairy Crest, who we'd become by then, we were taken over by Dairy Crest, our division, decided to franchise out the whole operation to private individuals. So rather than having them as employees, they'd be franchisees.
Okay.
And I just thought, well, they need an accountant who understands the dairy industry, and the rest is history. I picked up about 200 or 300 clients literally within months, because all the depot managers I knew really well. I'd been looking after them, and everyone there within their numbers, and it was an automatic thing for them to refer their franchisees to me. And that was the whole. I guess that was the start of the givers gain concept as well. Sort of kind of like and those principles have stayed with me forever. That if you give stuff and advise people and help people wherever you can, you will always get clients back in return. And that's just stayed with me. And so it's nothing new. It's been there since 1987, which is 36 years now. So it's something I firmly believe in and still do to this day.
Yeah, well, that's great. It's as I say, it's one of those things that the entrepreneurial side just isn't very common among the accountant side of things, but I do think that the world is changing in that sense. You can't accounting was traditionally always something that looked backwards. It looked at what had happened, and I feel that in business these days it's not really possible to operate that way anymore. You have to be looking forward as far as the figures go, and I think that the generation of accountants like yourself have sort of pioneered that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, you can only look forward if the numbers that you've got for the historic stuff are good. If you can't work on forecasts and business plans and stuff if the financial controls are not there in the first place. So it goes without saying you've got to get the historic stuff right, and you can't really have a good finance director or CFO unless there's a good accountant or good accounts manager there. Because if you're working on rubbish information, you'll make the wrong decisions.
Yeah,
I would take that a step further nowadays with areas like data. I'm a great believer in data analytics, and I love data. I love numbers. It's that's where I don't differ too much from other accountants. I guess I differ in that I love a P&L and a balance sheet. Don't get me wrong, but I also love looking at trends. I love looking at other companies within a sector. There's a bit of software we've got now which is brilliant, and I won't say the name of it because I don't want everyone else to get it, but it's a brilliant business software and enables us to, for example, if a client comes to me and says, look, I'm thinking of selling up my business, what do you think it's worth? I'll immediately look at the last 20 or 30 or 50 deals in that sector, look at all the key stats arising from it, download that to Excel, and then I'll be able to give them a picture as to what businesses have changed hands for in recent years and perhaps why. And I love looking at data like that and looking at trends and making decisions based on that. And one major thing that we did probably a couple of years ago now is that I just thought, what's the value of our client base? What's our portfolio actually worth? And I was sort of had it in mind that it was, I don't know, 100 million, 150 million. I just guessing really, but I actually went through the exercise. I downloaded a load of data on our clients, all their balance sheet information and everything, all off Companies House. Again, there's a bit of software that will do that. I was then able to put the market value in for each company. And the conclusion I came to was that, and I've done the exercise 2 or 3 times, is that the market value of our clients were about 4 times the balance sheet net asset value, roughly speaking. And I think that's across a population of 180 companies. So really, even if absolute fag packet calculation, but if most people say, "What's my business worth?" There's a good chance it could be 4 times the balance sheet net assets. And some businesses are worth much more than that. Some businesses.
It varies sector to sector. I mean, we obviously being in the startup sector, we see a lot of different businesses from lots of different sectors, and there is, as you say, there's like a standard kind of multiple valuation within a lot of businesses, which is your balance sheet times 4 is your sort of standard sort of valuation. But I mean, I'm aware of especially in the tech sector and ones that are tech sector with subscription things and so on. Some of those are going 30, 40 times the multiple, and it's crazy.
I was looking at some yesterday, phone. I've got a client that is in the tech sector and in general tech, nothing too complex, but I was looking at some of the multiples that those businesses have changed hands for. I went back 5 years. I looked at, I think, 6 or 7 that were quite very similar to our client, and they were coming in at about 1.8 times turnover, not profit, but turnover.
Right.
So that gave the client, they really found that insight useful, because I didn't just say it's that. I sent them some information to prove it was that, because these were companies that they had heard of, they'd seen, they could see the acquirers, and really what a business is worth is not what it's worth to the seller, it's what it's worth to the buyer.
Yeah.
So you always have to sit in the buyer's shoes to work out, right, what are they going to get out of this? And that's what I always try and do, is do like a 5-year forward forecast for a business, look at the cash flows, start discounting the future cash flows, because money in 5 years' time is not worth the same as money today, and then come up with a present value of what that business is worth, and it's often very different from what it is by just multiplying a pure multiple to the company's current levels of profit. So that's really where and why you get some of these big valuations for tech businesses and SaaS businesses, and very often it's the lifetime value. That's another formula that I tend to find that accountants don't really use. It's one of the first things I ask a new client when I see them, because I know they haven't got the answer. Smart ask to work it out for them, and it's just a useful calculation to know. And you just say, well, how long do your customers stay with you on average? What's the average spend per head, and what's the gross profit?
So therefore, what's your average customer lifetime value, and therefore you can use that calculation to multiply against the customers you've got and say, right, that's your total lifetime value of your entire customer book. Effectively, is X. Okay.
And you can then start looking at longer term values, and that underlines lots of tech stocks, and some of them are wrong. Some of them are grossly overvalued. It's not always right, and some of them are almost like Ponzi schemes. Everyone piles into them thinking it's the next best thing, and it's going to be Facebook or something like that, and it doesn't happen. So
exactly, So I was having this conversation the other day with someone actually talking about some of these investments that have happened within sort of a startup companies that have churned in loads and loads of speculative investment based on the sort of direction they're going in, and then it quickly turns out that that valuation just doesn't stack up in the real world, and they're in a position where they can never really recoup their money. They're always going to make losses, and I must admit I struggle to get my head around the kind of the investment mentality behind those. I don't really get it.
Well, I think sometimes there's tax relief on it. If it's a CDIS or an EIS, there's 30 or 50% tax relief on it, and you're kind of thinking that some people are doing it for that, because and going into it, because if you look at a CDIS investment, and say you put 200,000 into a business, I think you do 200,000 a year now, and you're getting 100,000 off your tax bill as a result of that, you've then got a net loss of 100,000 that you could get another 40% tax relief on. So you could ultimately cost you a very small proportion of the amount you've actually put out if the business fails, if your shares are never realised. So some people are prepared to take that stab. And also from an IHT point of view, shares in private companies are outside of your estate for IHT purposes. So some people, it suits them. I think VCTs, venture capital trusts, are ideal for that, where you've got a collective investment, so the risk is more managed, and if once you've held the shares for 2 years, it's outside of your estate, as opposed to normal conventional stock market investments, which are in your estate. So there's things like that. There's various tax incentives that people have got for doing that, and that sometimes causes, should we say, some of the losses cushioned, should we say.
Yes, because it's almost being used as a tax product in its own right.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you look at a good example, I think of some massive losses with WeWork, and being a WeWork tenant, as we were for about 5 years, I always used to follow their accounts, and I think they valued at 28 billion or something like that at one stage, and they had something like 10% of the office space let out, compared to Regis, yet their share price was 10 times the size of Easy, or something ridiculous like that. It just didn't stack up. I mean,
No.
and sure enough, the market caught up with them, and they're now worth 2 billion or whatever.
Yes, exactly. I mean, how does that happen? How does a company like that get away with effectively getting that valuation? Is it pretty much is it driven by effectively like media? Is it driven by a
Hype.
yeah,
Hype.
yeah.
I think in the case of WeWork, I think it was very much a society. It was almost like an online society that they were creating that was much, much more and bigger, and had huge potential, much more than just a property stock, an office rental stock. That people would become WeWork members for life and spend much more money within that ecosystem. I think that was the original intention.
Yeah.
Certainly of the founder, who was quite a flamboyant individual in the USA, Adam Neumann, I think his name was.
Yeah.
And he's been on Netflix as a program on it, which I haven't seen yet. I'll watch one day. But that was a good example of it. Everyone following the herd. And I think one of the major investors in it was SoftBank.
Yes.
That's SoftBank, and I don't think that's necessarily inappropriately named at times, but I'm sure they have made huge amounts. I think SoftBank were one of the early backers of Facebook.
Yes,
so
they're an early backer. They're a big backer in a number of quite big tech companies, and I think they've had, as all of these sort of ones do, some successes and some failures. That was one of them.
That's right, and I think I don't know what the ratio is these days, but some private equity investments is something like, it used to be something like 10% for every 10 that they invested. 9 would fail or just flop or just plod along, but 1 would be a massive gain. It's portfolio management, isn't it? It's people like that, just in hedge funds and what have you. That sort of they look at it accordingly. But going back to football, we talk about losses and defying logic. Why would anyone buy a football club? Well, because there's been some horrendous losses in that, and particularly outside of the Premiership. I mean, the Premier League now is very much a billionaires' plaything, and that they're big investment groups. We've seen Chelsea, they've got major, wealth management funds, and behind them can take a long-term punt. And I guess in the case of some clubs, look at West Ham. The owners of West Ham, I think, bought the club for something like 50 million, loaned it another 40, and I think the overall value now, I'm told, is about 700 million. So they will be sitting on a very big profit when that changes hands at some stage. I think they sold 27% for 170 million, I believe, to a Czech investor. So Spurs 2 billion. I think the owner bought Spurs for probably Joe Lewis through Enoch Investments. I don't think it was even 100 million. He's owned it for 20 years. He's sitting there at 2 billion now.
That's interesting, actually, because I was watching the recent sort of bidding that was going on around the Manchester United, because obviously they listed it for sale and to sell it, but I think they were asking for about 5 billion in the end, weren't they? Is how much they were asking?
I think 6 billion, but people are saying Glazers pulled out and said they're looking more at 10 billion.
They wouldn't sell it for 6, which was just crazy, isn't it? To think that there's it's a company, it's a that sort of thing. I can't remember how much they paid for it. It was about $1 billion, I think they paid for it.
So, it wasn't that much. No, it was. I think you'll find they paid about 400 million.
Wow.
And they've taken dividends over there. They loaned it money, but they've taken big dividends and management charges. I think when you net everything off, the 400 million they paid for it, I think it's probably less than that, a lot less than that.
Yeah, probably was.
And it's worth 6 billion. I think Jim Ratcliffe, who's
he was one of the people involved in looking at buying it, wasn't he?
Yeah, he still is. I believe he's agreed he's going to buy 26%.
Okay.
And that's going to take a few months to go through. But if you look at Jim Ratcliffe, it's interesting because Britain's biggest company by market capitalisation for years was ICI, Imperial Chemical Industries, for anyone who's under the age of 40. They hardly exist now. They've been broken up over the years, but ICI were a massive company. And Jim Ratcliffe owns, or is the founder of INEOS, Britain's obviously wealthiest man, and he made his money by buying up lots of petrochemical plants and everything cheaply from ICI. So cheaply, or negotiated a good price for them and then turned them around into viable assets again. So it's funny how stuff goes round in circles, and so Jim Ratcliffe, fair play to him, what he's done at Ineos is fantastic. But he's obviously keen to lose a big chunk of it at Man United. But no, I don't think he will lose it. I'm sure United in years to come, as the population in India and wherever grows, the subscribers.
Well, I mean, even though they're a long way from where they used to be at the moment, they're still one of the most profitable clubs in the world, and that's and I think that's where where the value obviously is. It's their global brand is still huge. That will die off if they don't start improving what they're doing on the pitch, but it is
massive when you think about it, and that largely is thanks to a gentleman who died the other day, Bobby Charlton. When I was a kid growing up, it was Bobby Charlton, George Best, Dennis Law. They were the heroes. They came out of the ashes of the '58 Munich disaster, and that really propelled that club during the '60s and '70s to massive heights. They even went down in the '70s. They were actually in the old Division 2 for one season, and won it easily and came back. But the club was in the doldrums really until Alex Ferguson went there. And what I heard the other day was that when a lot of people wanted to get rid of Ferguson when things weren't working out in the early '90s, the one supporter who really stood by him through that time and really gave him his support and persuaded the rest of the board not to get the P45 out was Bobby Charlton. So a lot to be thankful for.
It's amazing how one person can have such a big impact on something like that. It's incredible. So you touched on EIS and SEIS earlier. So when companies, when early stage companies are looking at that, how would you advise them? I mean, in terms of how what's the best way for them to wrap that into what they're doing and provide that benefit to incoming investors?
Well, someone said to me a while ago, whenever you form a company, you should apply for EIS relief anyway. Just do it. You may never need it, but just do it. Get authorization and get CDIS authorization as well. And CDIS, you can do that if the business is, I think it's within 2 years old, or the trade is less than 2 years old, and the CDIS is 50% rather than 30%. So really, just doing it anyway as a contingency just makes sense. I'm not just saying that because that's a service we can help people with, but if there's ever any chance that you may require external investment, just do it anyway. Because any of those investors will get tax relief at source. There's a big market of EIS investors out there that have got big tax liabilities that they want to mitigate. And also there's companies that they may want to add value to, because really you want an investor who's not only going to buy the shares, but who's going to open doors for you and help you with your branding or your technology or whatever, or and a bit like on the Dragon's Den. It always makes me laugh when I'm watching people on the Dragon's Den. I know it's just for TV, but that they're haggling over 5% here or there and risking losing someone who could, open the door to the next 10 million worth of revenue. You think, what are they doing? But if they all agreed to it, it wouldn't be good telly, would it? But
I think it is. I think things like that are dramatized for particular reasons, and I have heard plenty of stories of people who have had the handshake on the program and then never actually got the money, because when they look under the surface, they realize it's not as good as they thought, and the deals pull back off the table.
Only 50% of all deals actually go to fruition. So the ones you see on the TV, 50% of those actually go through. But I think one thing I would say about the EIS is that when you're looking at someone who's got EIS relief and they've got shares in your company, you will automatically look to think, well, hang on, they're putting X in, but it's only really costing them Y after the tax relief. So you will tend to reduce the sort of shareholding that they will get to reflect that fact. I think that's a fair assumption to make, because why give up too much equity when you don't have to? I would tend to think along those lines, and I know other people do as well. So that's another consideration. So if in doubt, get it done. And usually it's only certain industries can do it, but the excluded sectors are things like accounting, financial services, and legal services, and pretty much all other sectors are eligible for EIS. So it's not too restrictive.
So on that note, I mean, so obviously you've talked about the sort of financial management stuff of big businesses and the stuff that you've been involved in and so on. So the financial management side of obviously a small company, an early company, one that's starting out, you touched on how the foundational stuff needs to be in place for any company that wants to sort of achieve things. What would you say are what would you think would be the key things that need to be in place as a financial foundation in any company? What would you say needs to be there?
Yeah, I mean, I think I always get an online accounting system. Go for Xero. I personally would always use Xero with your startup. We're up to probably 10 million turnover.
Yeah.
It just makes it nice and easy. Link your bank account. You really do not want to be spending time on admin and accounting. That's going to stop you client facing and earning revenue. The most important thing about any business is cash flow. Really, not just get the invoices done, but get them paid. Look to see if you can get a business which is a subscription-based business wherever possible. You want to be signing up people that are paying money on a regular basis, because those businesses tend to be more valuable. So look to see if you can make it subscription-based in any way. I would focus very much on the sales and marketing and making sure your systems sync and talk to each other. If you get a CRM system, get something like HubSpot, which is low cost, you can get the free version of that and then build up subscriptions over time. So I think getting your sales and marketing and your accounting talking to each other. It's so important. So your technology and everything within a business, because it's difficult to change once you've been going. It's hard to change it, and get unbiased advice. Don't speak to a software company about their software. Is it the best? Because
they'll always tell you that their software is the best one. Exactly. Yeah.
So speak to someone independent, and speak to someone like yourself, Alex. You will get your digital strategy overall right from day one, because companies often have difficult legacy issues they have to overcome at a later stage. And it's really like building a house. Get the foundations right. If you get those foundations right in the early days, and really think about the business and think about areas, and speak to other people who have been there, seen it, done it. And there's plenty of those around now. There weren't many of them around 33 years ago, so you just had to do what you felt was right. We didn't have this thing called the internet. It was all post and stuff like that, and just about spreadsheets. But, in the good old days, and sounding a bit like Uncle Albert now, but things are very different now. There's lots of good advice out there, but it is all about sales, because as one guy said to me when I was a young trainee accountant, he said, "Look, make sure you look after your sales and marketing of your companies, because without sales, nothing happens with that until someone sells something." That was his exact words, and they ring in my ears even now, 46 years later. He's absolutely right. You don't get the sales right, the business is no business. So that is the most important thing, is getting your clients, your prospects.
I think the best analogy I've ever heard for that is that what your business effectively represents is a conveyor belt, and what you're doing is, at one end you're putting boxes on, and the other end they're dropping off into the abyss, basically, and that's your money going out, and your money coming in is the boxes you're putting on the other end, and you've got to be able to put them on fast enough so that there's always at least a couple of boxes on the conveyor belt. Otherwise, it's you end up with a completely empty one, and you're done. It's a good analogy.
A lot of people in business, a lot of people fall into the same trap of getting really busy and then forgetting their marketing. They say, "I'm too busy for doing marketing." Which is a stupid thing, really. Is that your marketing should go on. You should know what your lifetime value is of each of your customers, or what it should be if you're at early stage, and you should be prepared to spend between 10 and 20% of that lifetime value to get them in the door in the first place. That's a big number. But the most successful businesses, the thing that differentiates normally the successful businesses from the average businesses or the poor businesses is the marketing. That tends to be the one differentiator.
It's such an important element that I know is left out a lot of the time, because it's one of those things that's, I think what it is there's people are aware that marketing's an expense, and they're also aware that it's actually quite difficult to quantify that spend. It can be quite difficult to know, right, we've spent X, how much have we actually got back for that? And that's an area that the best marketers are good at making sure they're tracking, but it still is something difficult for people to understand. And so there's always that fear and that risk a factor of, if I spend £100,000 on marketing, will I actually produce £100,000 worth of business? Because I really, ideally, if I'm going to spend £100,000 on marketing, I need to be generating £500,000 worth of business. I don't want to be only just making the money back. I need to be generating a lot more of that. So I think that the issue that people have is the fear factor in terms of how they spend it, and so you get the natural approach to that seems to be people who therefore they spend little bits here and there to and get a little bit back, and then stop because okay, that worked, we've got some customers in, and then they start working their way through, and now they've got to go and do it again. And you get these businesses that are in this kind of feast and famine cycle where they get a lot of customers for 3-6 months, and then those customers naturally reach sort of a life cycle end, or they start to gain on more costs or whatever it happens to be, and then they've got to go out and market again. But it takes them another 3-6 months to build the marketing up to give themselves another 6 months worth of good revenue again. So it's one of these things that is difficult to sustain sometimes. I was going to come on to the next point as well. Obviously, talking about the the sort of financial management and early stage businesses. You were talking about the subscription model.
Yes.
As far as sort of financial sustainability goes, what's the kind of the best methodology from your perspective of how to do that, of how to build that into a company?
Yeah, I think there's there's a number of things really that we always work on eight key drivers of value of a business. The sort of things that you work on that will add value the most, that will make that business much more valuable longer term. Because we believe that a business, every business should be built as if it was for sale, even if it's not. Because if you build a business like it's for sale, then it will generate good cash flow and profits and everything. But also, most importantly, it will give you an exit at some stage, which will give you, a good multiple and give you a good return for all the work that you put in and the risks that you've taken. So having those disciplines right from day one makes sense. I mean, and financial strength is one of them. Is the business growing? Is the business different from the individual? If the company is the business and the person is the business and there's no one else there, then that's more of a self-employment than a business. But there's no reason why they can't grow and employ people or be part of a much bigger network of people they collaborate with. I think not having all your eggs in one basket, having a good spread of revenue between customers and not having anyone who represents more than, say, 10% of your total turnover, I think that's wise there. And if you do have one big customer, I always say to people, look, well, if you can handle one big customer like that, well, try and get 10, try and get 10 more of that sort of size and build scale within the business to do that. Of course, some businesses aren't interested in that. They're really lifestyle businesses. They're just companies that just do it to make a living. They're not there to build a business as such, and they're probably not the sort of people that we deal with. We deal primarily with people that are looking to build more scale and exit a business. There's 3 stages as we see it to business, and that's build, scale, and exit. And in the build phase, you're still building, you're still growing, you're still very much proving the concept, and the scale side is when you've proved it, you've got a good product or service, and you're now employing people and building the business up, and that's where cash flow difficulties can often arise. At that build stage, that scale stage, and then the exit stage is where you're, refining the business and getting it ready for sale. So it's scale and exit stages that we tend to work with people more. And we've seen some fantastic examples of businesses that were worth, 3 or 4 million, ended up being sold for 20 million, where certain actions were taken over, say, a 2 or 3 year period that really fed through to the value. There's lots of things that you can do to make sure that a business is sustainable, but I think making sure it works without you is probably the most important part. Systematize every aspect of that business where you can. I found particularly use now recently with videos, with Loom, when I'm delegating stuff or when I'm trying to communicate stuff to clients, film a Loom video. It's much more effective. They can look at it in their own time. They can watch it. It's much more of a live demo rather than just a summary that goes in it stays in an inbox somewhere. And you can do the same thing with delegation and training. You know, you can create a training manual that's video based, and it's a lot more fun shooting it because you're just talking to a screen and giving examples, and it's much more practical examples. So I think an operations manual made out of Loom might be a great idea for lots of businesses, because I think if you say to most business owners, write everything down you do, they won't do it. It's far too dull and boring to do that. Whereas if you actually do a representation of it on screen, showing spreadsheets and different aspects of technology that you use, that could be a far more effective way of capturing that and then sharing it to people, and so it could be a really good delegation tool. So things like that I find are very, very useful. And the other thing I would say to make the business very sustainable is DOA, and I got that from Steve Clark, a mutual friend of ours a few years ago. DOA stands, it's not dead on arrival, thankfully. It's delegate, outsource, automate. So what that basically means is that you focus on where your unique abilities are, where you're really, really good, where you're in the flow, where you're doing the best for the business that you can do. And any aspects of your job or your role that don't fall within those unique abilities, then go into the DOA section, delegate, outsource, automate. Because if you make sure those things are done, and you focus on where you're really adding value, that's when you can 10x everything you do. And that's another little saying of mine that I picked up recently. 10x is a book. 10x is easier than 2x is a book. A brilliant book written by Dan Hardy. Benjamin Hardy and Dan Sullivan. And it's the whole concept of the 10x mentality, because it's much easier to completely start again and have a completely different change of approach to everything you do than it is just 2x, because 2x basically means doing what you're already doing but doing loads more of it, and
doing twice as much. So I can see that book. It's on the shelf behind you.
Oh, it is. It's intentionally so. Yes, it is.
Look at that. There's some good product placement there. I like what you've done.
It is. No, it's brilliant. I'm on commission. No, I think it's a fantastic. It's a fantastic concept, and it's fairly, like a lot of these good ideas, it's common sense, but not necessarily common practice. And it just makes you stop and think every time you come to a decision or an idea, or is this 10x? What's the 10x version of this? Does it meet the 10x criteria? If it doesn't, then you shouldn't be doing it, because 10x is achievable, and you can go back in your life and see where you've actually achieved 10x in the past. So to think that 10x is impossible, it's wrong, because there will be many instances where you've done it already.
Yeah, exactly. So with regard to, obviously we've touched on exit strategies to some degree. Obviously we've touched on it a couple of times, but in that sort of space, I mean, obviously we're talking about build the business from the start as if you're intending to sell it, whether or not you are intending to sell it. If you build it as if you are, then it naturally becomes more profitable, more sustainable, more automated, more able to operate without you, and so on, which I think is very important. But when it actually comes to building an exit strategy for someone, so let's take the example of someone who's literally building a startup at this very moment in time. They're very early stage, but they've got, say, a 5 to 7 year plan of build it, scale it, sell it. That's their plan. What's the best way, as far as you see, for them to make sure they're going to be able to hit that aim? What's the best way for them to go about doing that?
Yeah, I always think that you break it down into KPIs, and every business has got different KPIs, key performance indicators. What I always like to try and do with clients is sit down and work out what the key profit drivers are of that business. Is it the number of outgoing phone calls they make? I'm talking to a client the other day, that every new client that they've had in the last 5 years, in this particular case is a software business, 60% of their sales go to businesses that either are startups or have not used an existing software system. And that completely changed my mentality on that business, to think, right, okay, we need to be finding the companies in that sector that have been created in the last 2 years or whatever, and let's see if we can get in front of them, because that's clearly where it attracts the most business. Now, so KPIs is absolutely essential, and you don't want too many KPIs. Probably 5 as a maximum performance indicators, and it might be number of networking meetings you go to. It could be, I looked at our turnover, for example, over the last 12 months, and I found that 93% came via recommendation and 7% from direct marketing. So that proves to me that, relationships are absolutely key. The more relationships we have, and the better quality of those relationships, and the more we give to the people in those relationships, in terms of referrals, knowledge, connections, inspiration, the more we get back. So we'll ramp that up. We're going to ramp that up more. Because it's great fun. It's great working with other people, because the more I interact with them, the more I learn. The more I learn, the more I can be of value to customers and clients. I love learning. I love finding out stuff, and I love finding out stuff that's going to affect our bottom line and that of our clients. So, we're very much in a knowledge society now, aren't we? And the more we can capture that cost effectively and deliver it efficiently and monetize it, the better. And I do see data and analytics as being absolutely key to that. And not an area that our competitors are involved in. So, data drives most decisions. It should do. Your hunches and this sort of stuff. Yeah, it can be important, but data's got to be the
it's good. Data has to be there. I remember talking about this with somebody not that long ago about when you make a decision based on a gut decision versus a data-based decision, because sometimes, even if you're making a gut decision that's not backed up by data, you can still be right sometimes. So it's good example of that is Tesla, for example. If Elon Musk was looking at the data in the market of electric vehicles, he wouldn't have gone and started an electric vehicle company, because there wasn't really very much happening in that space. There wasn't really anything selling very well, but he had the hunch that he could make one that people would want to buy, and managed to go out there and do it. So it's definitely it's definitely something that is important to any entrepreneur, any person that's starting a business, and especially someone who's starting a business where they want to shake up a sector, or they want to change the way a particular thing works, or they've got big ambitions. They've got to have that gut drive and that gut feel to sort of pushing them forward in terms of where they want to go.
Yes.
But ideally, what they would do is temper that with paying attention to relevant data. Otherwise you end up in the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result and wondering why you're not getting one.
Very much so. And that's something that I looking at data, looking at analytics, and I've seen the power of that data, and I've seen what other people have done in terms of monetizing data as well, which I find very interesting. And I think if you look for areas of pain, if you're looking for where the next big opportunity is, find areas of pain. I've been selling a house for the last few weeks, and there's certainly some areas of pain in that. And anyone who can make that process easier, you could be on a winner. And I think if you look at people like Rightmove and Zoopla and stocks like that over the years, they've transformed the industry, but it's still fundamentally broken. It still needs fundamental changes. Whether it actually will change, it remains to be seen, because it's the vested interest. It's a nice sort of gravy train for people that may want to,
That's it. It actually benefits a number of people to keep it longer and slower and more painful, because they extract more money out of it that way. It's often the case, isn't it?
But there's definitely areas of pain there, and I think people are looking to make money. It might take a massive investment, and it might be a complete sea change required in the attitude of, dare I say, solicitors and estate agents or whatever. But I'm sure lots of people will say that same about my profession, accountancy. It's painful. There's lots of areas of pain, and that's why there's been transformation in recent years on the digital side of things. And a conversation this morning with a firm of accountants, a medium-sized firm of accountants who have got their own digital transformation department, which I found really refreshing. They've got 4 people in it, and it sounds brilliant. And I'd be more than happy to work with them on some projects. I think it's much needed. So every profession and every industry has its areas of pain, and that's where the greatest creativity comes out, and that's what is entrepreneurial.
Solving those problems, fixing those pain points of people. I think a big area for a lot of startups, especially, is a fear around getting money out. Fear, especially the early stage companies that we work with. One of the first questions the founders will ask us is, okay, right, I'm putting a lot of my own personal money into this to get it off the ground.
Yes.
how am I going to get that back out at some point? When do I start seeing something back from it, and how is the best way for me to structure that? What sort of advice would you give people on that front?
Yeah, I think if you want the money back, if you need the money back, if you're loaning it, short term into a business, then just introduce it via your director's loan account. Now the company can pay you interest on that money, because obviously you're losing if you're taking out of investments or what have you. It's costing you money. At the moment, you can get 6% on your money if you tie it up for 18 months, I think. And like I was looking at Ford money the other week. For the Ford Motor Company, they've got a huge banking arm there, and they'll give you I think 6%, and they'll give you 5.5%, I think, with immediate access, and that's up to limits of 2 million. You can put 2 million in. That's a lot of money, and it's a lot of interest that's coming in. So you look at that. You look at I think if you put money into a company and you've got that balance on your director's loan account, you can pay yourself interest on it, and I think the first 1,000 a year is interest free anyway, so the company gets tax relief on it, and you don't pay tax on that money. I think it's 1,000. So there's that, and that gives you the flexibility, so that as the company starts to make profits, it can start paying you back that money over time. That's the easiest way of doing it, because if you lock it in as share capital, it's locked in there forever. So if you put 50,000 in as all the share capital, you won't be able to get it out, and you want to come to sell the company or something like that. So you want it on your director's loan account. You want a relatively small share capital, but a higher director's loan. That you take that money out. At that sort of rate. Now, when it starts making good profits, you then get the situation where whether you take a salary or dividend, and the gap between, it used to be much more tax effective to take as a dividend, but that gap has been reduced quite a fair bit over the years as your profits go up. So it's almost getting to the stage where it won't make any difference whether your salary or dividends. It's still, if your profits are up to the sort of 40,000 mark, it's still more tax effective to take as dividends, as I understand it. Well, I'm a little bit rusty on that, but I would tend to go down the dividend route, but make sure you document it, that you minute dividends are being taken. You've got to sign documents somewhere in case HMRC want to get treat it as salary at some later stage, because salary carries employers NI as well as employees NI, so it's quite expensive to take it on that basis. But I do think it's swinging more back towards the salary route rather than dividends once your profits are getting above a certain level, about 100,000 mark, I think. So definitely it's still more tax effective to do as dividends, but of course you can only take a dividend if the company's making profits. And that's where a lot of people get caught out in the early stage, where they take it and they say, look, I'm taking a dividend, I'm not taking a salary. You've got to be making profits first. So if it's a loss-making business and you're taking it as dividends, you're in for a nasty shock at a later stage. You will get taxed on that as if it was salary. So do not take it out as that. And if you put money in as director's loans, then you don't want to be taking a salary or dividend anyway until
you just draw the director's loan back out. You
won't pay tax on money that you don't need to. Get the money back out. So
absolutely. On the director's loan thing, actually, the interest thing, that's something new to me. I wasn't aware that could happen. So you mentioned Ford Bank. How does that work?
I mean that's just the fact that you can earn money. You can earn 5 or 6%. There's an official rate of interest you can charge. It provided the company, if you loan money to the company, it can pay you what they call a commercial rate of interest on that money, and that commercial rate of interest has gone up now. Provided, say for example, if it was paying you 10% interest on it, and the commercial rate of interest currently is 5%, you will get taxed on that difference, that different 5%.
So you get taxed on the 5%, right? Okay.
So I would always say, look, just whatever the existing savings rates are or the current account rates are at the moment, and they are 5%. Because the interest rates are high, then provided you're paying yourself no more than 5%, then there'll be no taxable benefit in kind on that. But it is a taxable receipt of money once you've exceeded £1,000 a year as an individual. But husband and wife, £1,000 each, that's still a fair bit of money that you get tax free. So the company gets relief on it, and you don't pay tax on that receipt until you've exceeded £1,000 each individual next year.
Fantastic. Okay, so the final thing I want to ask you today is, what would you say are the key ingredients that make a good business? What are the key things that you see in the most successful companies you work with, and the most successful companies you've seen? What do you think are the key ingredients that they
Yeah,
share in common?
it's always people. It's people. There's no question. It's the people behind that business. You can have and their relationships. Because if they're good people and they've got a good personal brand, if you like, and they do what they say they're going to do, they're trustworthy, and all the things that you associate with a good person. That there's every chance that's going to be a good business. I met a lady once, and tragically she was killed in a car crash. Her name was Beth Howell. She was a fantastic lady, really, really sad. Back in 2005, I think she passed away. And she came to me, the day she came to me to tell me that she was setting her own business up. She worked for a big finance company, and she was leaving to set up her own finance brokerage, which is still going to this day. It's a very successful business. And I said to her, I could just tell, and she said, "Do you think I'll be successful?" And I just said, "Bloody hell, I can see it in your eyes. I could just tell, the energy." She'd been brilliant at her job anyway, where she was working before. She was only early 30s. You just knew she was going to be successful, and she was. Sadly, for the tragically short period of 3-4 years or whatever, she had that drive, determination, focus, doing the right thing. She'd done a business plan. She did everything she said she was going to do. She would come back, "Yep, I've done this, and next year I'm going to do that." You just knew. I've never seen a greater example of someone who had the will to win and to be successful. And she'd have gone on and done fantastic things for that company. And I will always use that as an example of someone that just that success was a decision. She decided that she was going to be successful, and nothing was going to stop her. I think you need that. But that also you need to be able to spot opportunities. You've got to, there's things that you can do. You can fill in, online. You can do it. You can do disc profiling and that sort of stuff that tells you about different characteristics as a person. And everyone can be successful in business, but some more successful than others. Some are too relentless and too focused and too driven, and achieve business success at the cost of their home lives or their marriages or their family lives or sanity. You can take it too far. It's achieving that balance, obviously, is key.
Yeah. Okay. So to summarize on that, the key element in any business, as far as you see it, is ultimately the people behind it and the drive and the passion they've got to make it work.
Yeah, and the relationships that they it's another saying I've heard from Dan Sullivan, which I love. It's always think who, not how. Whenever you get a business problem, when you're starting a business, don't just think how, think who. Who can help you? Which people do you know? Who can you learn from? Who can you benefit them and partner with, so you can give them value, so you can get that back? What's your intellectual capital? I see. It's very, very important. We can all get intellectual property, and we all develop that over the years. But what's our relationship capital? Let's go in order with that. Who do we really know? Who are our KPIs, key persons of influence? That's Nick in Daniel Priestley's phrase. But it's right, it's correct. Look at the KPIs in your sector. Who are the key persons of influence? Who have influenced you in the past? Who have helped you in the past? There's every chance that they'll help you in the future. But always think how you can help them. Another book I read, which is by a guy called Joe Polish, another American. That they tend to be all American, these people. Joe Polish wrote a book called "What's in It for Them." Yeah, very good book, actually. Really good book. And it's a bit like the giver's gain philosophy. Or if you give and look at ways you can help other businesses, it will come back to you automatically.
Yeah, ultimately, it works its way back around. If you give without looking to receive, it's actually the sort of the almost the biblical wisdom, isn't it? Look again, give before you look to receive, and you shall receive. It's kind of the
it's very true. It applies to business. I didn't, and that's why I like BNI so much. The business networking things I used to go to. I loved it. I did it for 12 years. Getting up at the crack of dawn one morning a week, but what I saw that as part of my learning, I learned so much. I got loads of referrals out of it, and I gave loads. But what I really enjoyed most of all was learning about different sectors and different businesses, which I still apply to this day. you can never learn it. I think that's the other key thing. I think you've been in business, expect to learn a lot. You will learn more and more every day. As long as you've got that thirst for learning, I think you'll always have that drive to be successful, because it's so interesting to hear about other businesses and industries and what works for them and what doesn't. I've been watching Succession a lot lately with the thing.
Oh, yes.
The series on Netflix.
Yeah, I've seen it advertised. I haven't got around to watching it myself yet, but I have seen it. It coming along. It's supposed to be very good.
It's loosely based on the Murdoch family.
Yeah,
it's good. A lot of swearing, a lot of interesting stuff on there, should we say, and a lot of I have to act as interpreter sometimes, because there's a lot of assumed knowledge of the US financial markets and stuff like that, and corporate world. Yeah. I have to explain it to Jane at times, because some of it's a bit very Americanized, but it is good.
Yeah.
It's good entertainment.
Well, that I think is a great place to end it for today. So, thank you very much, Gary, for coming on. We had a small couple of minutes in the middle of that.